All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises and honor and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rechak Wadash. Double honors to the apostles, the elders of Great Millstone, who well. Peace and mercy to the Tazadak I came out there that's laboring in his truth with all sincerity. I want to say Shalom. All right, and today's topic, all right, is going into, all right, what I seen on New York Times today, which is how war in the Persian Gulf could spill into the U.S. economy. All right. So I'm going to read the first headline real quick. It says, rising energy prices, snarled supply chains, and higher government debt could hurt all American consumers. All right. And this leads to me to my first precept, which is 1 Peter 5 and 8. And it reads, I'm reading the A&P. It reads, be sober, well-balanced, and self-disciplined. Be alert and cautious at all times. Now, how do we be alert and cautious at all times? All right, by measuring the times diligently in itself. Now, I'm going to get that real quick. Matter of fact, I'm going to finish it off. It reads that the enemy of yours, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, fiercely hungry, seeking someone to devour. And right now, we know that these damn devils is seeking to devour really the whole world, but particularly, all right, the Israelites, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. And right now we seeing what these damn devils is doing over there, with the wars in the Middle East with Iran. Okay, but ultimately this is all, the Lord is using these devils, all right, to fulfill the Lord's will, which is to crash this, the U.S. dollar and, bring in, that mark of the beast, which is the microchip. All right, this is all through the Most High's doing. He's just using, Esau to fulfill his will. All right, and we seen that, he's trying to devour, we seen what he did earlier in the year with Venezuela. All right, he's trying to take all these resources from all around the world, because he knows his time is ultimately short. That's why there's a lot of feud, there's a lot of, problems going on, especially because he's trying to take over Greenland. All right, and right now the U.S. is helping, Israel, from Iran, and that's causing major controversy, okay, which ultimately, it's all due to the will of the Most High, because, this war is going to affect the U.S. economy, okay? It's going to affect the U.S. economy. Inflation is going to rise, all right? The prices of goods is going to rise, all right? The prices of gas is going to rise, all right? The cost of living is going to rise. All right, and that goes into, when you read the book of Revelation, the 13th chapter, remember, it speaks about how he calls of all, both rich and poor, free and bond. All right, when you single out rich and poor, the rich become more rich and the poor becomes more poor, and he's trying to wipe out the middle class. Okay, and people constantly talk about, the cost of living here in America, especially in the major cities like New York City. All right, with the rent prices skyrocketing, you have people paying $3,000 for a 1-bedroom. All right, only making a certain amount of money, because after you get paid, 35 to 40% of your check is going to taxes. Okay, and especially now they might be even taxing people more because they're going to be trying to fund the military. All right, which we know that the U.S. pumps trillions of dollars into their military system, okay? And, through Iran using asymmetric warfare, all right, it's only leading to America pumping more money into its military, so they're trying to drain out America's resources. So now, going back real quick before I bring the article out, I want to get the book of 2nd Ezra, chapter 9, verse 1. It reads, he answered me then and said, measure thou the time diligently in itself, and when thou seest part of the signs past, which I told thee before, then shalt thou understand that it is the very same time wherein the highest will begin to visit the world which he made. Okay, so how do we, measure the time diligently in itself by, linking up the prophecies, all right, the current events in the world, Salakia, looking into geopolitics, looking, what's going on throughout the four corners of the earth, all right, and linking up to the scriptures. And right now, we're living in those times where you have to be more sober and be more cautious of what's going on in the world. Okay, you're not supposed to be in that mirthful spirit. Okay, right now we're really at the last days of the last days, but we're really like in those beginning stages, because when you read Matthew the 24th chapter, it goes into how Yahweh Shah was telling the disciples that these are the beginning of sorrows. All right, the rumors of wars. We're hearing about World War III. Okay, matter of fact, to prove that, let's just go real quick into World War III. It got all these articles, all these YouTube videos going into World War III. It says Putin's emergency address, World War III fears skyrocket. So this is just the talks. Even if it's not, this is not accurate, these are just the talks of it. You know what I'm saying? The gossip. So going back, to the scriptures, the Lord is visiting this place. All right, and right now we're seeing the beginning of sorrows. We're entering those beginning stages. Okay, so now I want to get the article, all right, real quick. In New York Times, it says how war in the Persian Gulf could spill in the U.S. economy. Rising energy prices snarled supply chains, and higher government debt could hurt all American consumers. Now you remember, the U.S. owes trillions of dollars already. Okay. Matter of fact, let's Google that real quick. U.S. owes trillions dollar debt. Yep, it says as of March 2026, the U.S. national debt exceeds $38 trillion, representing the total accumulated borrowing by the federal government. This debt is growing rapidly, increasing by roughly $1 trillion every 100 days, and now is larger than the entire annual U.S. economy. You know what I'm saying? So look, this is right here. It says who holds the debt. About 70 to 75% is held domestically by Americans and U.S. institutions, including the Federal Reserve, state, local government, pension funds, and individual investors. The remaining 30% is held by foreign investors, primarily Japan and China. Now, remember, China right now, the situation with the Strait of Hormuz. Right now Iran is allowing only Chinese tankers to to move their oil through the Strait of Hormuz, because we understand that I believe like China uses about 30, like I'm gonna say 30 to 40% of its oil it flows through there. So it's funny how America owes China money, and now they're the reason for all this chaos happening. Okay, so it says, look, growth rate. The debt has seen its fastest acclimation outside of the U.S. COVID-19 pandemic, averaging 8% annual growth, while GDP grows slower. So imagine, you see, the country is already in debt due to the pandemic, even making it worse. All right, but now with this war occurring, it's only going to lead to the economy being brought even worse, in its worst state. So now we going back to the article. It says how the war in the Persian Gulf could spill into the U.S. economy. So it says 3 kinds of events have historically pushed the United States into recessions: financial crisis, oil price shocks, and pandemics. I just mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic, on how basically it made the America's debt become even more worse. So exactly what this war is going to do is going to lead the economy to a recession. And remember the prophets is saying this, man. All right, a lot of major corporations might shut down. Things are going to change, man. All right, things are going to change very rapidly. All right, and all we're really waiting on for is that microchip being mandatory at a global level. We don't know what's going to happen, but we just seeing how everything is, fastly crashing. It says the U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran have already brought about the second circumstance on that list, and if things go badly, potentially the first. Much will depend on how long the conflict lasts and how severe it remains. The impact has grown as strikes have expanded beyond Iran, paralyzing airports and damaging industrial facilities across the Middle East. If there's a cease of fire in the next week, trade flows could get back to normal fairly quickly. But if the bombs keep falling for more weeks or months, as President Trump has foreshadowed, so they already said it. If there was a ceasefire in the next week, the trade flow goes back to normal. But the Lord put the spirit on these devils to keep hardening their heart, just like how the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart in Egypt. He just hardened the modern day Pharaoh, which is Trump. Because it's his nature. Isn't his nature to go to war. All right, to bring death and to bring hell upon earth. Matter of fact, it says that real quick in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verse 4. It reads, "And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth." So that horse represents power. All right, and that that was red. That's talking about Esau, Edom. Okay. All right, and power was given to him that sat thereon. All right, the power was given unto Esau, going to his blessing. He was blessed with the fatness of the earth, as well as Job 9:24, the earth was given into the hand of the wicked. It says, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's taking peace away from the earth. It just said it in the New York Times that if they agreed to a ceasefire, trade flow will go back to normal. But Donald Trump already foreshadowed that's not going to happen. War is going to continue to happen. All right. It says, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword. And hey, that's Esau, man. And ultimately, Trump is fulfilling these, proving, he's a damn devil, man. So going back real quick to the article, it says, let me see. It says, but if the bombs keep falling for more weeks or months, as President Trump has foreshadowed, the economic drag could become much heavier, and the cost to U.S. taxpayers be much greater. Here are the main channels through which Americans may feel the effects. So let's go through it. It says, strangling oil supplies. In the days after the war began, tankers stopped entering the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran controls, and through which 20% of the world's oil is channeled. All right, so we're going to just jump down. Let me see what else they say. Yup. So let me see what else they got to say. All right. So it says trade, risk upon risk. The United States is already straining under high debt loads, which an economy that has been, I'm just trying to read in simple terms. Okay. So I'm gonna read from right here. It says, if investors lose confidence in a handful of technology companies' ability to deliver on their promises, stock markets that have become heavily concentrated in their stocks could take a hit, since people enjoying the benefits of that stock boom have been propping up consumer spending for months. A sharp downturn could quickly lead to layoffs, so a lot of people will lose their jobs if the stock market crashes. Because remember, a lot of these companies, stay afloat because they have investors. All right, they have investors investing into these corporations. Now, if these major tech companies, Walmart, Amazon, if they end up, if the stock market crashes and investors lose their money, a lot of people could get fired from their jobs. Okay, now this could lead into a plethora of amount of things. When oil goes up, gas goes up, recession. People getting laid off, and ultimately it's going to lead into famine, which goes back to Revelation, the 6th chapter. Okay, a day's pay is going to be bread, grains, things of those natures, as well as ultimately the mark of the beast, which is the RFID chip. All right, and that's exactly where we're heading into. All right, the stock market crashing, inflation, recession, okay, the economy becoming more worse, all right, and no one's really paying attention, only the believers. And this is the reason why it's important to always measure the times diligently in itself, all right, and stay occupied in the prophecies, as the book of Sirach, the 38th chapter, goes into, all right. But, Lord willing, this is edifying. I want to give all praises and honor and glory to Yahweh Shem Yahushua. And with that, Shalom.